Welcome to Therapy in the Great Outdoors, a podcast about the business and practice of nature-based pediatric therapy of all kinds. If you are a nature-loving therapist who works with children, this podcast will help you start taking your work outdoors into nature and help you grow a profitable nature-based therapy practice or program that connects children to nature and changes their lives and yours forever. I'm your host, the ever honest, always 100% real, Laura Park Figueroa. I have been a pediatric occupational therapist for over 20 years. But 7 years ago, I almost left the field entirely. I was so burned out. And nature-based therapy is what saved me. It reignited my love of my work, and I saw profound changes in the children that I was working with. I'm the founder of Outdoor Kids OT and the creator of the Contigo approach, an evidence-based framework for nature-based pediatric therapy services. I've helped dozens of pediatric therapists start and grow successful nature-based practices through my business coaching and online programs. The latest of which is the Therapy in the Great Outdoors community, TIGO for short. TIGO is an online membership site with loads of resources to support you every step of the way as you start and grow your nature-based therapy work. You can find out more at therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com. Working outdoors with children can be a wild ride. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's jump in. Hello. Welcome to episode 1 of Therapy in the Great Outdoors, the business and practice of nature-based pediatric therapy. I am so excited to be launching this podcast for you. And in this episode, number 1, I'm going to introduce myself a little bit so you know who I am and why I'm doing this podcast, as well as share what you can expect in future episodes. What's in it for you? What are you going to get out of listening to the TIGO podcast? So, as I said in the intro, I'm Laura Park Figueroa. Some people call me LPF for short, which I love because I've never had a nickname in my entire life. So when I found out that people were calling me LPF, I was so happy. It was just this endearing thing. So if you want to call me LPF, feel free. So I am a pediatric occupational therapist. As I said, I've been in practice for over 20 years, and in 2015, after 15 years of working as an employee, as well as running my own seeing my own private clients on the side, I started a nature-based pediatric occupational therapy practice called Outdoor Kids OT, OKOT for short. I like acronyms. You'll learn that about me if you listen into the podcast. So OKOT started in 2015, and I found that it just completely renewed my love of my work. It reignited my love of working with children. It reignited my love of my profession. And working with children outdoors helped me work in a way that felt very authentic to how I felt occupational therapy and pediatric therapy in general should be practiced. Just a few years after starting my practice, I started getting phone calls from people asking about how I started the practice and asking for business coaching to help them do the same thing. So since 2017, I have helped dozens of therapists through many of my one-on-one coaching, but also online programs that I have, which I'll talk about in a bit. And I've had a business coaching practice where I help therapists start their nature-based practices. In 2017, I also started the beginnings of creating the Contigo approach, which is the nature-based pediatric therapy framework that I developed to help pediatric therapists of all kinds take their work with children outdoors into nature, using evidence and theory and practical tools to help you do that. So the Contigo approach stands for connection and transformation in the great outdoors. And like I said, it's for all different kinds of therapists. Early on, when I was creating this approach, I had a PT friend that said to me, "This is not just for OT, Laura. You need to think about making this more multidisciplinary for other professions as well, because this could benefit so many kids that other therapists work with as well." So it is an approach that anyone can use in their work with children. I got really interested in evidence and creating frameworks that are based on evidence. And so as I was creating the Contigo approach, I decided to start a PhD program. So I enrolled in my PhD coursework in 2018, and I currently am starting my research. So yes, 2018, it's 2022. It's a long road. It's a long road, but the research is in progress and it's really exciting. I am studying nature-based pediatric therapy services that are provided by occupational therapists because my degree is going to be in OT. So yeah, I really developed the Contigo approach out of that work, out of my PhD coursework, out of the research I was reviewing for my PhD, as well as the practical work that we were doing at Outdoor Kids OT. So it's not just theory and research, it really is based on practice as well. It's a very unique framework. All right, what else? So the Contigo approach started to be developed in 2017. In 2019, I led the first in-person retreat to teach the Contigo approach to therapists outside of Outdoor Kids OT. Up until that point in time, the Contigo approach really was being developed to guide our work here with the intention of later sharing it with therapists. And in 2019, in November, was the first time that I shared it with the world, you might say. And I was so scared. I remember in the summer when I found the retreat center that I wanted to host the training at, and they required a deposit. So I had to send an $8,000 check to the retreat center to reserve the rooms for the Contigo approach training. And I just remember putting that check I physically sent them a check. They're old school. I physically sent them a check. I remember addressing the envelope. I remember putting the stamp on it. I remember walking to the mailbox. It was a super sunny day. And I remember opening the mailbox and just hesitating a little bit before I dropped that letter with the check in it into the mailbox to send it to the retreat center because it was so scary. I did not know if people would even sign up for the retreat. And I was putting $8,000 and even more really on the line. And I was just so scared. And the miraculous thing that happened was that 27 people attended that retreat. And it was just a beautiful time. I had such a joyous time teaching and being outdoors with other therapists. So that was just a highlight of the end of 2019. And then, as we all know, in 2020, the pandemic hit. So only 4 months after holding that first in-person retreat in the Contigo approach, we had to cancel everything that we had scheduled for 2020. We were going to do 2 more in-person retreats. But, it was really a blessing in disguise in some ways because there were therapists asking me if I would ever make it into an online course because there were people in Australia or in New Zealand, like people that lived really far away from where I was located in the US, that were asking me to put it into an online format. And so the pandemic got me to do that. And so we had some video from the first retreat that we ran, and we had good feedback from the people who had attended that retreat on the content. So we knew that it was kind of a tested approach at that point, right? Because people had given us feedback on the training. And so we made that into an online course in late 2020. And now over 100 students have attended the Contigo approach training, which is really amazing. It's so exciting to see where this is going and to think of all those people taking kids out into nature. So 2020 also brought about some changes in my business as well because we, like everybody in the world, we had to stop services. And so we created some digital products for nature-based therapists, as well as created the Business Bedrocks group coaching program, which to this date, over 70 therapists have completed that program. And the goal of that program is to help you automate your business as much as possible and set it up for success with systems. We focus on mindset, operations, finances, and marketing in that program. That program is going to be part of the business coaching area of the Therapy in the Great Outdoors membership community, which I mentioned in the intro. So all of these things were going on, right? And you're probably getting overwhelmed just listening to everything. But there's lots of things I haven't even said yet. Like I was all during that period of time also doing a podcast called Mind Your OT Business, which some of you may have heard if you're listening to this episode. There are 75 episodes still there for you, and it's had over 100,000 100,000 downloads, which is amazing, over 3 years of doing it. And I've ended that podcast because I really wanted to niche my focus to a nature-based pediatric therapy audience. So it's like niching and expanding at the same time because I was serving OT entrepreneurs. Obviously, the podcast was called Mind Your OT Business. So I was serving OT entrepreneurs. A large majority of the people that I work with in my programs have been nature-based over the course of the years that I've been doing business coaching and online work. But the serving the broader OT audience, as well as trying to serve a wider audience of different professionals, was becoming harder and harder as the business grew. And so just recently, with the launch of this podcast, the launch of the Tigo community online, which will have free areas as well as paid areas, these are like really exciting ways to kind of put everything that I do in my work under that umbrella of nature-based pediatric therapy in order to really serve people really, really well. So it's a niching, but an expanding in some way to serve more than just occupational therapy professionals and entrepreneurs. The latest of the things that I am doing is to get the Therapy in the Great Outdoors membership site set up, which will have free levels for anyone to join. Like there's always going to be a free level of this community. And then there will be practitioner levels and business levels where people can pay to get resources related to nature-based therapy practice with children and related to business development and business coaching. And that business level of the membership community is where I will be doing my Business Bedrocks program. I'll be doing coaching for therapists who are in the growth phase of business that are like Bedrocks alumni, essentially, who have already done kind of the foundational work in their business, and helping people grow and scale their nature-based businesses with systems. I love systems. You will hear me talk about systems on this podcast. So enough about me. What are we going to talk about on this podcast? What's in it for you? That's what I will give you a little nugget of marketing business advice. And if you ever do anything in your marketing, you have to stop talking about yourself and talk about your customer. So what is in it for you? You're my customer per se. Many of you are friends, so it feels weird to say that, but what are we going to talk about on this podcast? What benefits are you going to get from listening to this podcast? So I purposefully put the tagline of this podcast as the business and practice of nature-based pediatric therapy. When I say business, I mean a lot of the things that I cover in my Business Bedrocks program, which are entrepreneurial mindset, systems and operations, getting operations set up in your business so that everything runs smoothly and efficiently so that you're not running around like a chicken with your head cut off trying to manage everything in the business. Automating things. I love automating things. Finances. Managing the business finances is your job as the CEO of the business or as a program manager. So I should say this right off the top of the podcast. I'm going to talk about business on this podcast, but the reality is that if you are not even running a business per se, but you want to start a program, like a nature-based program, even if it's a nature-based summer camp that you might run 2 weeks out of the year, and it's very much a side hustle for you, you might say, you still need to learn to think like an entrepreneur, and you still need all of the business content. I truly believe that to run effective programs, you need a lot of this business content that we are going to talk about on this podcast. So when I say business, think about it like business, your practice or a program that you may be starting if you're running a practice or a program. Okay, so operations, smooth operations, managing the finances of your business, not being afraid to make money, not being afraid to talk about money, owning your role in managing the money in your business or program. And finally, marketing and sales, like learning how to sell, learning how to market your business. What are you marketing to people? You're not marketing physical therapy. You're not marketing occupational therapy. You are marketing the transformation that people want to receive from your services. We'll talk more about that on future episodes. And also outside of, so that's the Business Bedrocks framework, but outside of that, like beyond that, I know a lot of you that are listening are in the business growth phase. So I also want to talk on this podcast about business growth. How do you grow a business? Once you're beyond the start phase and you're really growing and scaling, You need to learn about sales. You need to learn how to manage a team. You need to learn how to be a good leader. You need to learn more about boundaries, and you constantly have to fight those mindset battles that you're going to have with when new challenges come up. The mindset issues are just bigger challenge, bigger mindset issue, right? So I want to talk about business growth on this podcast as well. I plan to do some live business coaching sessions. People loved those when I did them on my old podcast. I will still do those here. They'll just be focused on nature-based business owners, as well as Ask Me Anythings, where you can get coaching from me by asking questions when I put a call out on social media. And I really want the business part of this podcast to help you to think in a balanced way about your work. So therapists are helpers. We really struggle to be business-minded, but I'm kind of a weird anomaly in that I'm a therapist, but I'm also an Enneagram 8, which is not really a helper person. So it's interesting I even went into therapy, to be honest, but I'm really business-minded. I actually will be the balance to people who really want to help and not pay themselves. I will really encourage you to charge for your services, to not be afraid to make money, to not be afraid to sell, to not be afraid to market, because as an Enneagram 8, I am very direct and I feel very strongly about justice, and I want therapists to be paid for their work. So if you don't know what the Enneagram is, you can go to enneagraminstitute.com. There's a whole series from the summer of 2021 on my old podcast, Mind Your OT Business, about the Enneagram. Okay, so that's the business part. Now, practice. What do I mean when I say the business and practice of nature-based therapy? So one thing that I struggled with in my old podcast was that I didn't do a lot of practice stuff, because people would often ask me about doing an episode about sensory integration or doing an episode about, a certain treatment model or something. And that just wasn't the focus of that podcast. But on this podcast, because I have the niche of nature-based therapy, I want to include content for you that will help you in the practice of your work, the practicalities of your work. So things like reviewing research, current research articles, reviewing theories, talking about theories that inform our work as nature-based pediatric therapists, maybe highlighting favorite treatment activities that have been successful with children, doing interviews with nature-based therapists about their work or about topics that are of interest to them. So basically, any topic that is related to nature-based pediatric practice with children as a therapist, any kind of therapist, we will talk about on this podcast. So I want your ideas. What do you want to talk about on this podcast? What do you feel like the nature-based pediatric therapy community needs to be talking about? I want you to tell me. DM me on Instagram. I'm at Laura Parkfig, LauraParkFig. I did not want to put Figueroa because no one knows how to spell it. So Laura Parkfig, nice and short. And tell me what you want to hear on this podcast, or if you want to be interviewed on the podcast, I will be starting to schedule interviews for the next several months or so. So podcast production is really weird. It's like you record an interview, but then sometimes it doesn't come out for like months later because of like all the stuff on the back end that has to happen with scheduling. So just know that if you reach out to me, we will schedule and it will eventually come out, but it's not like an immediate thing that you will be on the next episode. So just wanted to give that little caveat. So that's it. Nature is so healing. We know this. We know that nature is healing for the children and families we serve, and for us personally as therapists. That is something that is very apparent in the research that I'm doing, that therapists find it's so life-giving to work outdoors in nature. There's less burnout, there's more profit for you, and it leads to sustainable businesses and programs that are still changing lives, like transforming people forever. It is so amazing. I love this work. So come along on the adventure. Join us at therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com. And remember, DM me on Instagram. Tell me what you thought of this episode. I would love to connect with you. Thank you so much for spending time with me today, exploring therapy in the great outdoors. If you liked what you heard in this episode, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes so we can share the magic of nature-based therapy with a wider audience of therapists who work with children who desperately need connection to nature nowadays, just like we do. If you're ready to take the next step in this adventure, join our free Therapy in the Great Outdoors community at therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com. The Tego community is a private space just for nature-based pediatric practitioners. We have loads of resources there to support you as you start or grow a nature-based practice or program. Our free Tego community has a discussion forum, a jobs and volunteers board, a crowdsourced treatment activities section, as well as free video trainings, research article reviews, and book recommendations from yours truly. Head on over to therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com to join today. So until next time, get outside, connect, reflect, and enjoy the business and practice of therapy in the great outdoors.